Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn Elefant. I'm an attorney licensed in Maryland, New York, and DC, and I've been practicing for several decades now. So I've seen the introduction of all different types of technologies, from the internet and the web to social media to cloud computing and now to AI. And from my perspective, when I first saw it, I felt the way that I did back when I saw the World Wide Web, which was what it was called back decades ago. It really seems like a game changer. So I am an attorney with my own private practice. As I was telling David, I practice energy law. I work with renewable energy companies and also landowners impacted by energy infrastructure and eminent domain. A lot of my clients are not able to afford legal services, and so I've always grappled with ways that I could provide education to them or serve them so that they could participate in these very complex regulatory proceedings, which have impacts on their property and their safety and their environment. So that's another reason why this tool is really exciting to me. And one thing I've been doing is putting on presentations for landowners on how to use AI to navigate the regulatory process. But anyway, I wanted to I'm just going to keep this in screen in not go into presenter mode, because I have other screens that I'm going to share, and hopefully we can be interactive. So if you have any questions or thoughts, just jump right in. So I just wanted to go through the first couple of slides very quickly about generative AI, how one of the possible uses for it is legal research, contract analysis, predictive analysis, client interaction, and it may not replace lawyers in the future, but can augment their capabilities. And the reason I started with those slides is it's actually a head fake. I didn't put those slides together. They were generated for me by artificial intelligence. I used an add-on to Google Slides called GPT for Documents and Sheets. I put in a prompt and I told this system to create a slide deck that discusses generative AI, how it can change the practice of law and be used by lawyers. So is it a perfect presentation? No. Is it something I would, just trot out and without any supplemental information? No. But is it a really good start? Absolutely. Is it a time saver? Absolutely. And so I thought that that was just one way to really convey the power of this tool and how easy it is to use and how much it can do already, and it continues to improve. So I wanted to just give a little bit of background on generative AI, and it sounds like most of you are very technically oriented, so you probably know more than me. So if you need to correct me, feel free to do that. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But generative AI is powered by large machine learning models, which means that it's trained on a lot of data to make predictions or string words or patterns together in a meaningful way. So essentially what it's doing is, instead of being programmed or coded for a particular result, it's gathering or retrieving pre-written responses. It's generating new content based on this information that it's been trained on before. And I think that's really important to understand, that it's not reproducing content that matches keywords or indexing the internet. It's actually generating new content based on these patterns that it understands. And the reason why that's important, maybe not so much for clients who are using it before attorneys, because attorneys are always very concerned that it's scraping the web, that somebody's going to come after them for copyright violations. And when you understand how generative AI works and the model behind it, you realize that that really isn't that much of a possibility. And those are some issues I'll talk about at the end, but I think there are ways to solve for that. I've tried to come up with different types of tools or AI applications that are relevant for access to justice. There are a couple of different categories of tools. There's commercial tools and free tools. Some of the commercial products that I have used as an attorney. So these are tools that attorneys can use to serve clients. They're not really for use by clients. I suppose clients could use them just in the same way that sometimes clients will use Google Scholar for research. But tools like Case Text, LawDroid, Spellbook, ClearBrief AI, they have different price points. And the ones that are commercial products promise to have greater accuracy, higher levels of confidentiality. Then there's also client-facing AI products. There's Do Not Pay, which I say do not, I call it, I don't know why it says no dot, it should be do not recommend. That was the product that was in the news a couple of months ago, or maybe it's been a year now, that was supposed to be generating responses to fight traffic tickets. And it turned out there was a lot of information in the system that wasn't completely accurate. There was some question about whether it really was even an AI tool, or if it was just kind of people in the background who were filling out forms for the users. So that's not necessarily one of the AI systems that I would recommend, but there are other law chatbots that are under development. And LawDroid, again, it's a tool that attorneys can use for AI purposes, but you can also use LawDroid to build chatbots. So there are, for example, some attorneys who practice immigration law or workers' comp law who have created chatbots to answer simple questions for users who come to their site, and those are powered by AI. So that's a potential tool that can be easily that can be adapted for use by an legal aid organization. And then there are, of course, the whole array of non-lawyer generative AI tools that you hear commonly in the news, like ChatGPT, also the plugins for Google products, like the one I just showed you with the slide deck. There's Anthropic's Claude, which is actually one of my favorites. It has a lot of uses. There's Google Bard and Bing. And then there are also tools that you can use to generate images, transcribe things. So there's like a whole array of tools. I just want to take a brief stop here. I mean, are all of you using these tools, or have you played around with them in some fashion or another? I'm just trying to get a sense of who I'm talking to.
I've certainly used the non-lawyer focused generative AI tools. My prompt writing for the image ones is really kind of not good, so I've not gotten anything useful that I could use for the image generators, but I use the other tools a lot for repetitive tasks, like speeding up repetitive tasks.
Right. Yeah, that's what I think they're very well suited for.
I've never heard of LawDroid, though. It's very interesting to be able to build your own chatbot.
Yeah, it's a great product, and it has a really good, I mean, at least for AI use, it has a very good price point, and even for building a chatbot. And it's been around for a while. So it's run by an attorney named Tom Martin, but he was sort of ahead of this company. Predates ChatGPT by a couple of years. I think it's been around since at least like 2017. So as a result, it's, at least in terms of building the chatbots, it's more well developed. So,
Carolyn, I've used the non-lawyer generative. My son actually teaches an AI course at Howard Community College. So every time he gets some new AI, I get to play with it, which is kind of nice.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, the graphics one is amazing, I will say. The creating art, I guess is probably the wrong word, but I'm interested if any of these have, let's say, the protections. I'm sure you recently recall about an attorney who decided he was going to draft a motion and use the site without taking the time to look them up. Do any of these have any protections for that kind of ridiculousness? Because it's going to happen again.
Right. Well, so there's a couple of responses to that. The first thing is that the commercial products are developed with attorneys in mind. So Casetext is trained, it's owned by Westlaw now. So, it comes with the same degree of credibility as Westlaw. LawDroid is trained on there's a Harvard library of scanned cases. So again, it's a reputable provider. So they're trained on cases. That said, if you use Westlaw and you don't read the case and you cite it in your brief, which was one of the things I did decades ago when I started my career as a lawyer, I was working on a brief, or it was an internal memo, and I just didn't want to write it. I wanted to get it done. So I found a treatise and I copied cases and I put them in the memo, and they stood for the opposite proposition. I got caught and never did it again. So, anyway, but they definitely are trained on actual case law, which is a protection. But again, the attorney could have avoided all those problems if he had just taken the time to actually read the case that came out. So fortunately, that hasn't set the law back too many years yet. But that is one of the advantages of using the commercial products. On the flip side, the price point is what you would expect it would be for a commercial product, and LawDroid is very modestly priced for doing that kind of research. And then there's a different price point for chatbots. Case Text is I guess it's a couple of $100 a month, but and I don't know how it's going to be priced now. It's been acquired by Westlaw. I mean, one thing that's been nice about these tools is that because the companies are eager to get people to try them, you can try it for a month. You don't have to lock into a long-term contract, so you can kind of turn it on and turn it off as you need it if the price is a challenge. And I don't know if they offer different pricing for legal aid organizations or for nonprofits. I mean, that might be another option too. So
we've heard from a couple of people at these meetings who have shared that very specific organizations did manage to swing deals with some of the bigger name products where they got access to them. But personally, to answer your question about which I've mostly used the non-lawyer generative AI, I kind of haven't crossed the pay threshold too much in my experimenting.
Yes. So I'd be happy to put you in touch. Again, Casetext was just acquired. I had been an advisor to their company for some time, so I saw how the product was developed, and I know some of the people there. And if you're interested in, at least like demonstrating it, I'll show you a demo at least of what it can do. I can put you in touch with some of the people there. So because even though they've been acquired by Westlaw, they have said that they're committed to making their product accessible for solo and small firms, for nonprofits, for people who aren't 1,000-person law firms with large budgets. So anyway, so we're going to talk about just some of these use cases that I've come up with. I also have a bunch of videos on getting set up on ChatGPT and little demos of, different types of products that you may not have used. That's the link for it, which it's a folder. It's got like 15 videos in it that you can have a look at. But one of my favorite uses for just regular AI is to record and transcribe client interviews. As I said, I work with landowner clients, and so often one of the tasks that I'll be working with them on is reviewing an easement agreement. It's either an easement for a pipeline on their property, or what I prefer is an easement for a renewable energy project, which is usually, and both of them are equally complex. The terminology is very opaque. They've often got, the agreements are sort of standard terms. And so I need to figure out for my clients what specific concerns they have and kind of personalize these forms. And so when I'm talking to the clients and I've got like a 15-page agreement up on the screen, I can't focus on everything. So what I started doing is recording these calls with my clients, and then I can ask them to articulate what concerns they have about the agreement that we've discussed. And as I go back to edit it, instead of having to call my clients and ask them something or forget to put the change in, I've got this transcription of our meeting, and I can incorporate that information. And I also find that when I'm recording myself, it's almost like I'm in court. Like when you're in court and you try to build a record, I'm more aware of, asking them, to summarize all of their concerns, or just like in court, I would ask somebody to list all of their objections to something. And so what I come away with is much more intelligible than just my notes. And then I can also share the summaries with my clients. And so they can also have a record of, what they've told me. So there are ethics issues and confidentiality issues that come up with recording cases. I wrote a long, like a 4-page article on it at my blog, myshingle.com. I talk about some of the confidentiality things. I go through the terms of service of one of the tools that I used for the recording, Fireflies AI, because you want to make sure that the tools, you want to make sure that the tools aren't going to be using those recordings for training to protect confidentiality. And the other thing is just another best practice I have with recording cases is I don't include highly personalized information in the recording. I don't ask my clients while I'm recording to provide me with their social security number or even their address or their birthday or anything like that. That doesn't need to be recorded. Chances are I've got that on an intake form already. And so I try to use those practices to minimize any possible, identification of the information, use tools that don't train on that information. And then I also disclose to the clients that I'm recording. That's something that's important. There are ABA rules there, I guess, probably like 10 or 15 years ago when recording on phones became an option. There were many lawyers who didn't know if they needed to disclose to their clients that they were being recorded or not. And if you're in like a one state consent place, the ABA said you don't need to necessarily disclose. I mean, from my perspective, it's a best practice. I'm not going to record. I just don't think it makes for a productive attorney-client relationship if I'm recording things secretly, even if I can do that because I'm in a one-sided consent jurisdiction. But what I have found is the reaction from my clients is they actually like it because they know that it's going to make me more efficient and it's going to make the results more accurate. So that's one approach that I've done. I could see a recording of client interviews being a very useful tool. I've done some of the pro bono clinics that I think the Montgomery County Bar sponsored, or I don't know which bar association sponsored them, but I could see something like that being really useful for, when I'm speaking with people, particularly in a big room where there's a lot of noise going on, my note taking is not always necessarily going to be right on point. So I think that that's a really helpful use case. Another thing I've used ChatGPT for, or that I've played around with ChatGPT, I haven't actually used it in real life yet, is it can be used to generate discovery questions. So in this example, I uploaded just a very simple complaint that I found on the internet, and I asked it to generate discovery, and it generated a bunch of interrogatories, and the results were pretty reasonable. And so again, that's a way that you can, if you're practicing on a topic that doesn't already have form discovery requests, you can have them generated by AI and it can expedite the process. One thing, this is not necessarily unique to A to J, but I have used it for tone correction. There are cases where you get a very obnoxious email from somebody and you just want to write something back nasty, and you're so upset you can't even, it's hard to control yourself. So chances are you're either going to send something back nasty or just not respond. But you can ask ChatGPT to, over here, I just for a prompt, I just said I received this letter from opposing counsel that says we won't appear for the deposition. Your client's a jerk and I'm seeking sanctions. And then I'm asking ChatGPT to reply in a respectful tone, and it did that. This tone correction is also something that you can use possibly. I know sometimes clients are very upset about a situation and may provide you with materials or declarations or explanations that are not necessarily the most politic, and you can't blame them because they're very upset about these things. But this way you can just run it through a ChatGPT and it can correct the tone of the communications just so easily that it makes those things much easier to fix. This is another AI tool. It's called Synthesia. And essentially what you can do is you can put in the script for a video and it'll create a character who will offer explanations of something. So this screenshot is from a court in Louisiana. There's a judge there, Judge Schlegel, who has used some of these AI tools to create kind of informational posts at his court. So here he's, he did one from somebody simulating a probation officer, explaining how that process works. He has other people on the website explaining how the court works. So it's kind of personalizes the websites without having to go through the trouble of actually getting a real person to appear and to say, you know, to say that they're to record something like that. And again, this would be something that you would want to disclose, that it's an AI figure and not a real person, but it communicates the information in a more personal way. And then I just wanted to go ahead. I'm up to the point. I'm going to give some examples. So here's, let's see if this works. Can you see my screen for case text? I think it should be up here. So one of the things, yeah, so this is the case text co-counsel tool, and it will do a lot of different skills, and I'll go back and show some of the other skills that it does. But one of the things that I did was, and I can't do this live because it does take a long time. So this document here is Donald Trump's deposition from the New York State Attorney General's case against him. It's like a 500-page deposition. And one of the issues in that case is whether Donald Trump inflated the value of his engaged in fraudulent activity by inflating the value of his properties. So what I did was I uploaded the document into co-counsel, and one of the things that it will do is it will let you ask questions about the document. And so what I asked it is, what does Donald Trump say about inflating his net worth? And again, this is a 500-page document, and it went into the document and it went through the whole thing. This is just the first page, and it pulled out every single instance where Donald Trump talked about what his wealth was, what, where he was talking about the valuation of his property. And he went through and said all of that. So you could imagine in a case, if there's like a motion for summary judgment, or if you have to brief it, you have all these citations. And it took an hour for case text to digest the document, and then it took another hour for it to answer these questions. And it gives me the citations back to the document. So if I click on this page, it takes me to the exact page of the deposition and shows me where the citation is. So this is something that ordinarily, if you were working with a paralegal or an attorney, an associate, I mean, this would be a full day's work. It would be a full day, and you wouldn't even have the hyperlinks to the document. You would have a page reference and you'd have to go back. So to me, this is just something that is like magic and could hugely bring down the cost of litigation for any kinds of large impact cases or even smaller cases. The other thing you can do with co-counsel, let me just bring this up here. See if I have an example here. You can also ask it to just write a legal memo on any topic. Let me just see if I have one that's already prepared here. Here's a legal research memo. Oh, okay, wait, I'm not going to use that one. Just takes, here's a legal research memo. I asked it to draft a memo on whether the use of artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, chatbots, and online websites for legal services is the unauthorized practice of law. And it very quickly put together, it says there's no clear answer, and it's right about that. But as you can see, it avoids the problem that the lawyer had in ChatGPT, because it actually links to the case, and this goes to a case, and it assesses, it gives sort of an analysis of the issue. Again, it's, the quality of the research is going to depend on the kind of question. And this is, I find that with questions of law that are open-ended, or where there isn't a lot of legal research already, the quality of the research it comes up with is not as clear cut. In one case I mentioned I did pipeline cases, and I had a case in Oklahoma, and I was trying to find out like what the statute of limitations was for a trespass case where debris was buried on landowners' property. And that, there's a lot of law on that in Oklahoma, and they came up with a very definitive answer. So that's something that case text does. And you can see it's really much more robust than some of the tools that are available already. Another tool I like to look at is Claude, and it's Anthropic. It's put out by Anthropic, so it's not an OpenAI product. And it's a little bit different from ChatGPT. It's a generative AI, but it doesn't train on user information. It sort of establishes parameters to kind of self-correct or self-check the information. So I just did a couple of examples. Like one of the things I did was I saw that Maryland has a complaint for absolute divorce. So I uploaded it, and then I just asked it for instructions on how to fill in the form, and Claude goes through and it reads through the form, and there may be parts of the form that can be confusing or need to be explained. It goes through and explains them. And then there's like one part where it says like put together a parenting plan. So I don't really do divorce law. I asked it what a parenting plan was, and I explained what a parenting plan is. It gives tips for preparing a parenting plan. So it provides like all of these resources for handling a divorce case. So, again, for somebody who's an experienced family law attorney, this is like, yesterday's news. But if you're working with pro bono volunteers or with people who have never done a divorce case before, with their pro se litigants who can have access to this tool in some format, it helps them figure out what they need to do to get something filed. Another
Carolyn,
thing that, yeah.
What in your experience is the difference? How does your experience with the Claude tool compare or contrast with like a ChatGPT of the same set of questions?
So with ChatGPT, there's no direct way to upload a PDF. So you have to use one of the plugins. And my experience, even though I have a paid version of ChatGPT, well, I think you still need the paid version for the plugins. I have not, my experience with the plugins has been very mixed in terms of getting them to work. And then I get frustrated, and then I just like walk away. There's also, even with the plugins, I think there's a smaller word limitation, or you can, cut and paste. If you cut and paste something into the ChatGPT interface, I think the results you get are similar to Anthropic Claude, but Claude will also do, I think 75,000 characters. I think ChatGPT is just doing 20,000. So it has a little bit more bandwidth too. And it, it enables you, because of that, I find it's a more user friendly experience when you can just upload a document and be done with it and not have to load up a plugin or wait for other. I'm very impatient when it comes to these tools. I feel like they're supposed to make my life easier. So, I'm not going to spend like 45 minutes coming up with a perfect prompt, which is, one of the things I'll discuss after. I'll come up with something, that's not too sketchy, but again, if it's going to take 45 minutes, I can do the thing myself. It's not going to help me. Another thing I did here was I uploaded an article by Ed Walters. He's head of Fastcase, and or I guess they were acquired by somebody too, but he had written an article on best practices for lawyers using artificial intelligence. He wrote a law review article on that back in 2019. So I uploaded his law review article, and as intelligent as he is, I don't necessarily want to read through his article. So I asked Claude to extract 10 best practices for lawyers who want to use AI in their practice based on the article. And it just pulled all of these things right from it. I mean, it's crazy accurate. It cites to the model rules, which are cited in the articles. And so again, if there's like an article or a scholarly paper out on a new area of law, it's just a really good way to kind of shortcut what you can learn about it. And then what did I do with ChatGPT? I do have ChatGPT up here. Okay, so for ChatGPT, I asked it to just help me develop an intake form for did I do that over here? I asked it to develop an intake form and some information on, for somebody who's preparing a will. I just ran a whole bunch of different tests. This is to provide, another thing it can do is provide educational materials, but that was, okay, wait, this is the marketing thing. Well, I did ask it to do an intake form, and then I asked it to, just see what I asked it to do here. Oh yeah, over here, I asked it to, again, with the divorce cases, this is something I did here. I uploaded the Maryland form interrogatory. So here I just cut and pasted them into it because they were short enough. I asked it for help. What would I do to answer those questions? And it came up with it helped explain, a little bit of what you need to send in. For something like the form just says like fringe benefits, but what it does here is it explains like what kind of benefits. It gives examples so that if you're filling the form out, it will kind of prompt you. And the reason I decided to do that, I was watching a Maryland Supreme Court argument, and one of the issues was that the appellant had apparently failed to disclose the existence of retirement benefits. And he was arguing that because, the interrogatories just asked like, what benefits do you get, but it wasn't specific. And so, so I thought, well, you could avoid a problem like that, if it's very specific and tells you exactly what you need. So I had it do that. And then the other thing ChatGPT can do is it can also put things in different formats. So if you wanted to keep the information in a spreadsheet, I asked it to put it into a format suitable for a spreadsheet, and you can just cut and paste this into like a Google sheet, and it'll have, the interrogatory, the explanation of what it is. And so you can use it for, to fill out the information like that. So those are just some very quick examples of ways that I have used it. And just getting back to the presentation now, I'll just finish up with some best practices. So I just wanted to go into like some of the best practices that I use. And one of the things is not overthinking the prompt. You've probably seen a lot of news about prompt engineering, people getting paid like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for coming up with prompts. And maybe there are positions like that. I don't know if they exist in legal, but to me, this is just a summary of kind of a good middle of the road prompt to get the best results on what you're asking for. You want to give the prompt some context. So tell the AI what role you want it to assume. Here they're telling it to be a yoga instructor. You want to tell it what you want the task to be. So if, I would tell it to be a divorce attorney, I wanted to write interrogatories. You explain to it, you can give additional instructions about what the goal is, and then, ask it if it understands. And then if it comes back with a response that isn't that great, you can also follow up and do an additional iteration. I think really that's all you need for prompts. And I think what's been happening is there are some people who are writing guides with just very extensive prompting tools. And I think it's starting to get to a point where this tool, which could be very helpful and accessible, is just becoming very much professionalized. So I think it may be turning people off. Other best practices, and we've talked about these a little bit in passing, you want to be sensitive to the confidentiality of data, but use prudent practices. So if you're putting a query into ChatGPT, there's no reason why you have to give your client's name and social security number. You can ask the question in the way that you might ask in a Facebook group. That should be sufficient protection. You do want to familiarize yourself with the terms of service, privacy, and training. I found, again, the legal commercial tools will all guarantee you whatever level of privacy is consistent with your legal obligations. With systems like Claude and ChatGPT, and like I said, they're very different. Claude has never trained on user data. It's always employed a different type of improvement process. ChatGPT, since its inception, has taken major steps towards protecting privacy. You can now opt out of having your data trained on. You can, delete the history of your chat. ChatGPT makes very clear that you remain the owner of your work when you input it. They're not going to try to take your work from you. I think what I've seen with these AI tools is sometimes you'll see a new one come on the scene. They tend to be the ones that have sort of sketchier terms of service where they say that they can, get a license to your materials or use it for whatever reason, or that they're going to train on it or something like that. So those are things to watch for. I know that some people are concerned about copyright infringement issues. There have been some copyright suits brought against OpenAI, both for violating copyright of written words and also for violating copyright of images. The general consensus seems to be that these cases are going to be very difficult to prove because, again, ChatGPT isn't copying that information. It's learning from it or extracting from it and then producing new content. So it really isn't that different from, if you're an artist, you go to a museum, you see all the Monets, and then you paint a picture that's inspired by that. So there may be situations where just, somehow by some roll of the dice, the content that ChatGPT produces is identical to a novel or to something that identical that somebody read. But I mean, the chances of that happening are so minimal. The other thing is that most of these lawsuits are aimed at the companies that are using AI themselves. People are not coming after there. As far as I know, there have not been any lawsuits against the users of these products. So, in fact, Microsoft just recently announced that it will defend any user of its AI tools in a copyright case. And that one of the reasons they've said that is because they think the risk of that happening is very low. So it's possible companies could be at risk for these copyright issues as they play themselves out, but I don't think there are any concerns that users should have. And the other best practice should be that, don't just take the content and lift it and put it into your own document. Try to personalize it and make it your own. And you come up with a product that's more valuable. And it's also something that will insulate you from any potential claims. One last interesting, okay, so again, we've talked about reading the cases and making them your own and making the content your own. The last question is disclosure. If you're using AI, what's the extent to which you have to disclose it? In the aftermath of that unfortunate case in New York, a couple of judges have, in my view, gone into overkill. They're making lawyers sign forms disclosing if they've used artificial intelligence or ChatGPT. I mean, there are probably situations where a lawyer doesn't even know if they've used AI, but I think Rule 11 and reading the cases you cite in the brief would have sufficed for something like that. But be that as it may, there are courts that are requiring it. Hopefully that won't happen to Maryland. And then in terms of working with clients, it's something that can be a selling point. Coke just yesterday announced this new flavor that was co-created with AI. And you can bet that people are going to go out and buy it just to see what that's like. So I think that clients, I don't think you need to conceal the fact that you're using AI from clients. You can explain to them, how you're using it or what it's doing as a tool to make you more effective, just in the way that, doctors use robotics and other kinds of automation and technology to assist with surgery. And I think that, as a patient, that's something that gives me more confidence, not less. So I think, you know, obviously in disclosing to clients, it's going to be something that's on a case-by-case basis, but I think there is a potential for using it as a selling point or as a positive. So it's an interesting question that comes up. So that's just, you know, the kind of an overview of all of the topics to cover. I didn't know what kind of background people had, but I think there's so much possibility. And I feel like when I use this in my practice, there's some things that it just speeds up so much. And even if it doesn't necessarily make things a lot faster, in those cases, it makes the quality so much better. So I think there's so much potential to really use these tools to help improve access to justice and also the quality of legal services that we deliver to some of the most vulnerable of our population. So I'm really glad that the committee is looking at this, and I hope that, you know, Maryland takes a very proactive. I hope the Maryland Bar takes a proactive approach, or at least a positive approach to reviewing these technologies instead of just dismissing them, because I think these are game changing. And this is the last point I'll make, is that this is where we are now. Generative AI was just launched in November. It's not even been a year, and already just even the improvements, and the quality kind of goes up and down, but overall, the improvements in the policy terms and in some of the commercial products has really been significant. And so, you know, you think about where we are now, where we might be next year and the year after, it could just be huge improvements from there. So, so thank you for having me. And if either one of you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I'm really glad that you're focusing on this.
Oh, I think it's so helpful. I think that I think you're going to find attorneys who are afraid to use it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you know, not too many, but I've mentioned this. I used it just to draft or come up with something. I was trying to change the wording on a grant application. And for whatever reason, I just wasn't getting it the way I knew what I wanted to say. And I just wasn't. And I love to write. So this was just a bad day. And I put it in ChatGPT and I went, look at that. It was amazing. So it does work. I think it's a great tool.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to share the slides that have that had the 3 lists of the non-lawyer and the
everything? I can share the whole deck, and I have other slide decks too. So I'm doing a longer presentation on Monday to the DC bar, and I'd be happy to share that deck also. But yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, actually, there's one last tool. If you just have a second, if I can share it,
Sure.
because it was this is the tool I mentioned, Spellbook. Spellbook is something that analyzes contracts. So this is a standard lease agreement from Baltimore City that I pulled off the internet and put into Word. Spellbook works in Word format. So it's like a, what do you call it, a Word attachment that add on. So what you can do is you can select who the represented party is. I'll represent the tenant. And then you can ask it questions about the agreement. So you can ask it for either insights on the agreement. Now, see, this is an interesting thing where it's important to understand how the product was trained. Spellbook was trained on publicly available contracts online, but a large amount of its training is on contracts that are filed at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the EDGAR contracts, so they're corporate contracts. And I found that they have limited relevance to regular people contracts like landlord-tenant agreements, influencer agreements. So it doesn't do a great job, but it does, so what you can do is you can ask it for suggestions. Sometimes it will say if a term is like here it says an unusual term, records and reports available to the lessor. So it says the term is unusual because it implies the lessor and landlord is receiving records about the property. Typically, it's the lessee or the tenant who should receive these records. and reports pertaining to lead-based paint in older properties. I don't do landlord tenant. I would think it is the lessor. It doesn't always get things right, but it takes you to the part of the agreement, and you can ask it to rewrite things. You can also do these. It's got this feature called spells, and so it'll point out other unusual terms. So it might highlight something that really is unusual in your contract. Like I said, so far my experience has been hit or miss, because I'm either playing around with regular people contracts or doing stuff, these renewable energy contracts, which also sometimes have unique terms in them because they're renewable energy contracts. But it also does this thing.
Full disclosure, when you said that, I Googled it, and the first thing that came up was my free book of spells. And since I'm not going to become a Wiccan, it might be the wrong thing.
Yeah. So you can also ask it to to summarize the terms or to explain a particular section, like here's the lead paint disclosure, and I could just ask it to explain what that section is. Oh, and so it's giving some detail about the background. So I have found this, like I said, I feel like if you're doing commercial transactions, Spellbook could be really useful. And drafting from the ground up, I have to say it's horrible. Like ChatGPT, if you told ChatGPT, I want a contract that provides for XYZ, I think it would do a better job than the Spellbook. But it did. I had an agreement just recently that had like a hazardous waste provision that was favorable to the lessor or to the company, not to the owner. And I asked it to redraft, and it redrafted it very quickly. And it would have taken me like half a day to do that because I don't usually deal with those clauses. So this is kind of in the genre of contract agreements, and it could, at some point it could be so helpful, because if you could program it with your rules, like I assume Maryland has certain rules that need to be included in landlord tenant agreements. And if you could just code those in, you could ask, it could just, you could analyze agreements and figure out like what's in there and what's missing. So it's just not quite there yet. I know there are other AI tools that do that let you kind of, code your own checklist, and then you can run an agreement through and see if it's missing terms, but they're still being developed. And, contracts, I think, are more challenging than case law, because, with case law, you can get access to a whole database. A lot of contracts are privileged, and you don't have that. But that was just the last tool that I'd wanted to show, to give an idea of what's going on in the contract realm of things.
Well, we can have some other Q&A here. I'm really grateful for this presentation. Thank you, Carolyn. We'll hang on here for a couple more seconds. I do want to stop the recording so that we have this kind of wrapped up. But again, thank you so much, and we'll be back in just a second after we stop the recording.